Hello guys, my name's Evans and welcome to this video. In this video, like I promised, I'm going to be looking at some of the tips that you need for your IGCSE ICT Paper 1. That is your theory paper. In the couple of videos that we've done in the past, we've looked at some tips for Paper 2 and we've also looked at some tips for Paper 3. And I understand some of you guys just this week are writing your Paper 1. Okay, so I'll try as much as possible to give you just the core things that you need for your theory paper. There has been some requests from a number of you guys that I start doing theory theory questions or solving theory papers. I'll see if that is feasible, but nevertheless, here is what I was able to gather up for you for your theory paper. Okay, so among the things that we are going to look at, as usual, we'll look at the structure of an IGCSE ICT Paper 1. And in doing that, we'll look at the different variants that are there. And we'll look at the focus for the syllabus. And we'll look at the time that you need to do this paper. We'll also look at the number of marks that have been allocated and the overall weight for this paper. And then we're going to look at the types of questions, the typical types of questions that you are going to you're going to find in this paper. And then we're going to look at the command words and then their implications. We'll also look at the assessment distribution. And we'll do the examiner report, something that is new for many of you guys out there and many teachers out there watching this video. I'll take some time to explain this document. It's a very important document that you need to take advantage of. And then, as usual, I'll finish off this video with some final words. Okay, so let's get started with the structure of an IGCSE paper 1. All right, so there are three variants for this paper, and you have variant 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. And these variants, they are offered in different regions, that is different zones, and they are usually taken in different dates. Okay, I've not come across a situation where they were taken at the same date, but most zones, they take a particular variant, and then other zones rather would take another variant. And so the thing that you notice about these variants is that they have similar questions. Okay, the questions are not exact, so to say. A number of them may be, but not all questions are exact, but the concept really is the same. So the topics that they generally focus on are the same. The questions may be slightly different, but about 80% of the paper is typically same topic, I would say. Okay, so it's important that you know which region you belong to and the variant that you take. Not to say that you cannot revise other variants. Suppose you take 1.2, not that you cannot revise 1.3 or 1.1, because the topics that they cover are generally the same topics that you also cover in paper 1.2. Okay, so the other thing that I want to point out is that this paper actually focuses on all the sections from section 1 to section 21 of your syllabus. So there is nothing like you're just going to study the theory concepts and leave out the practical. My suggestion also here is that you may not go into like a textbook and start reading out the practical concepts just for you to go and write the theory question. The implication is, for you to answer the practical section or the practical questions that appear in the theory paper is that as you practice with the practical exam papers, you build a skill. And then if you were asked to write anything about your skill, you should be able to put it down. Okay, so if you are able to solve a practical paper on a computer without any challenge whatsoever, then you shouldn't find it a challenge actually to write the concepts that have been applying in a practical paper. And this is where, guys, that I usually find me taking some steps, explaining questions in the practical papers, and some of you guys have been able to put up some funny comments and, whoa, why can't you do this? This one is shorter than this. Why can't you just click there, do this, do that? And I've been able to answer some of you and tell you that, well, you need some of the things that I've been able to explain for your theory. This is where it actually applies. Okay, so you need to know, you need to master how to create certain things in the practical paper, and you need to know the formulas, the actual formulas. I know with the coming in of the GUI, and you guys, that is the graphical user interface. You guys are able just to click there, click there, click there, and everything just happens so good. But in a theory paper, you may be required to type in a formula, or to write a formula, or to explain what a formula is, what it means, what it does, and so on and so forth. So it's very important that you actually know the formulas as you practice in your paper 2 and paper 3. Okay, so the questions that you do in this paper are all compulsory. So there is nothing like selecting a particular question. You attempt all the questions, and yeah, so basically that is that on the syllabus focus. The time that is allocated for this paper is actually 2 hours. Okay, so you should finish this paper within 2 hours. My suggestion is that you be as fast as possible, but also maintain your accuracy, just like we said in a paper 2 and a paper 3. You do well if you finish this paper in about an hour 30 minutes or so, if that is you are working at a very good speed, so that you could have some time to go through some questions, lest you left out some points, and you really need to maximize the number of marks that you can get from this paper. Okay, so let's look at the allocated marks and the weight for an IGCSE ICT paper 1. Okay, so this paper is actually 100 marks, and it constitutes about 40% of the overall ICT exam. Okay, so the marks for each questions, you find them indicated at the end of a question or sub question or part question, if you prefer, and you'll be expected to give valid points depending on the number of marks that each question indicates. So in an event that a question is carrying 3 marks, you are supposed to give 3 distinct valid points. Now I've deliberately put a distinct valid point because this is very important. Oftentimes candidates, they will see that this is a question maybe that's carrying 5 marks, and they just give you 1 point or 2 points and they expect to get 5 marks from that. It doesn't work that way. So in a Cambridge exam, each point is worth 1 mark. Okay, so you would rather give if it's a question that's carrying 5 marks, give 5 points. Even if you give 6 points or 7 points or 8 points on a 5-mark question, you won't get 8 marks. You get the maximum number of marks that are available on that question. So it's very important that you do that. And also I must state here that how you answer some of these questions, of course I'm going to mention this in the next segment, where I'm going to talk about the types of questions that you're going to expect in an IGCSE ICT paper. But may I say this here, that how you answer this question also is very important, because some of these questions they don't expect you to more like list in bullet form. Some of them, there will be essay questions, and you'll be expected to write more like in paragraphs and in essay form, so to say. So you should know which questions actually should be written in list form, which questions should be listed in paragraph form, and so on. But I will take time to explain as we look at the different command words that you're going to find in this paper, and how you can apply such concepts to answering some of these questions. Okay, so enough of that. Let's look at the types of questions that you're going to find in an IGCSE ICT paper. Okay, the simplest of them all is the SECO correct answer questions. That would look something like this. Okay, so you have a question such as SECO 2 items which are used as output devices, and you're required to SECO the 2 devices. So this candidate actually SECO'd the correct devices. Okay, so you will find, and these questions, this, like for example, this was question number 2. So you find such questions, they'll be towards the let me say at the beginning of the paper. You expect to find such questions around them. Okay. Other questions that you can find include tick correct answer, and questions like this would look like this. So say tick true or false next to each of these statements. Okay, and then you can put in your tick there. Now, may I say that a tick is different from a cross? Some of you guys would want to start putting up crosses here. Please don't do that. If an examiner tells you to tick, please tick. If an examiner tells you to cross, please cross. If an examiner tells you to circle, please circle. It's very important, it's very important you just follow the instructions that you're given in the exam. Okay, let's look at another type of question that you may find. Okay, so there may be questions that ask you to draw lines to connect relevant items, and they look something like this. Okay, so draw 4 lines on diagram to match the use to its most appropriate input device, and you find you're supposed to join lines and draw them. Now, please use a ruler to draw these lines, and use a pencil to draw these lines. It's very easy when you draw these lines with a rule and a pencil. If you made a mistake, you can easily erase that without really giving the impression to the examiner that you are confused about which line, because some of the students, you'd expect something like this. Let me just put up this. Let's do this. You expect some students to give you weird stuff. Maybe they drew a line here connecting this, and then they erased it. Okay, let me erase it. Let's see, is it my pen? Oh, okay, they erase it, and then they draw this line going there. Maybe they find that this is wrong, they erase this one equally, then they draw it there. So it kind of looks untidy, and this is going to make your work or make you lose some marks, because by the time you start drawing lines now to connect some of these other stuff, you find that it looks very messy. Okay, so please avoid doing that. So what you do well to use a ruler and use pencil. And if you're not so sure, just put a faint line, and then but be sure to come back to this question and put a bold line so that the examiner can really see that you have made your options. Okay, so let's go to the next part or next type of question that you expect to find. So the other type of question that you expect to find is actually one that has to do with completing sentences. Okay, so it may look something like this: complete the following sentences, and then there is a particular sentence, and then you're supposed to give maybe a phrase or a particular word or a sentence, but it has just to complete the sentence. Okay, so such type of questions, they may just be a 1-mark question or a 2-mark question, but they're also important. Okay, the next type of question actually is the one that has to do with name or give, and it actually looks something like this. Okay, so you're just supposed to name 2 items of hardware which would enable the computer to be connected to a local area network, and you have why am I even mentioning answers? Okay, so there you go. You're going to just to put a name, and this item or this type of questions actually have they're kind of similar with things like give 2 items or list 2 items of hardware. They are sort of similar questions that you expect to find. It's just the command word that is different that has been used, but the implication may be the same. Okay, so that is on this type of question. And you find also the most common type of question I've seen in IGCSE ICT paper has to do with describe. Okay, so a describe question could be like describe 3 types of medical aid which can be produced using a 3D printer. Okay, so most of the questions, let me say about 50% of the questions that you're going to see there would do somehow with something to do with describe, and I'll explain what describe really entails so that you guys can give accurate and typical answers as you describe anything. Okay, so other questions would have to do with explain. So an example would be explain what is meant by GPS. Okay, and I'll explain again what it means when you're asked a question to explain. Very rare of course, but in one or two occasions you may find in the paper where you asked to compare and contrast, and this typically just asks you to make let me say differentiate between the different concepts that have been asked in an exam. Okay, so when you compare and contrast, it's more like advantages and disadvantages, the kind of the way the pair goes in, the cons and pros, the benefits and limitations. You see that they kind of go hand in hand, so you're looking at both sides of the coin. Okay, so you look at you look at the comparisons, and then you're going to look at the contrast, something that is different about whatever you've been asked. Like in this case, we've been asked to compare and contrast the use of magnetic tapes with removable magnetic discs to make network server backups. Okay, so you're going to do that. And this is just a 5-mark question. So for you to get maximum 5 marks on this question, you state, okay, the comparisons, and you state also the contrast. At least 2 of them for each, and then maybe 2 of comparisons and 3 of contrast, and 2 of contrast or 3 of comparisons. That kind of will give you the full marks. But if you just went and listed 5 comparisons without really taking into consideration the contrast part, then you won't get the maximum number of marks. You may get 3 marks. Even if you listed 5 points, you may get 3 marks. So you must really be careful when you answer such questions, because each segment, for example, the comparison segment may carry a specific number of marks, and the contrast segment may also carry a specific number of marks, and that will give you good marks when you answer both ways. Okay, so the last part that I want to talk about is the obvious one. It is usually the last question in your IGCSE ICT Paper 1 exam, and in my opinion, it carries the most number of marks for a single question. In some cases, it carries as many as 8 marks, and for you to get those 8 marks, there will be some tricks that you need to do. Otherwise, a number of people just get 3 marks at most, 4 marks, 5 marks. And there's some reasons why students usually don't get or score many marks on this type of questions. And I'll give you some simple nuggets that you guys can use in your exams so that you can maximize on the number of marks that you can get on a question that has to do with discussion. This is an essay question, and so I'll show you really how you can answer such questions. But here is a typical question of how a discussion question can come about. It says multinational companies often use video conferencing. Discuss the advantages and disadvantages of holding video conferences rather than face-to-face meetings. Okay, so you're talking about the advantages, and you're talking about also the disadvantages. I like this question because it was really stated that you needed to look at 2 sides, both the advantages and disadvantages. Sometimes they may not give you the 2 sides, and they require you to figure out that you need to look at both the cons and the pros. And if you don't do that, you just go one direction, and you're going to find that you're going to find this a little bit confusing. Okay, so there are other types of questions that you're going to find in an IGCSE ICT paper. Things like give reasons, you may find list, you may find identify, you may find evaluate, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the general idea, or the only thing that you're supposed to do, is to know exactly what is being required of you so that you can give typical answers. I've noticed that in exams, it's not that usually that students don't know answers, that's why they fail exams. I've found out that students really know, okay, too many answers, or they have too much information, and sometimes they just don't know the exact information to give on a particular question, and end up getting less marks or no marks at all on a particular question, and that really costs them the good marks that they would have gotten from the exam, and that affects the overall their grade. Okay, so knowing some of these things, guys, you may say, well, Evans, why are you taking time to explain some of these things? This is very important, guys, and I take time in my classes when I'm really teaching my students. I take time to really talk about some of the command words that I use and what is expected from the students as they answer questions that deal with certain command words. Okay, my goal is to make sure that students maximize on the number of marks that they can get from a particular question, and that way I know that when they get their A stars, they'll get their A stars maybe about 95%, 96%, 97% out of 100, so that we really wire this paper. We really get the most from this paper. Okay, so yeah, there's design also, I forgot that, and let's look at the command words and their implications. Okay, so I'm just going to get some selected command words from those that we've just from sharing, and we're going to talk about one or two things that you need to note as you attempt questions that have to do with such command words. Okay, so let's get started with command words such as explain. Okay, so in an exam, when they give you a question that has to do with explain, what an examiner is actually requiring from you is that you need to make an idea or a situation clear. Okay, you need to describe, okay, in a more detail, or in what I would say a revealing relevant fact. Okay, so the idea is that you are supposed to show how you translate or comprehend or interpret information that is based on prior learning. Okay, so you could have, say, a topic on networks, and a question can ask you to explain what a local area network is. The examiner actually wants you to show you understanding how you've comprehended the concept of network. Okay, so it will go with what you know about the devices that you connect, you use to connect to create these networks. Okay, the cables that can be used. Okay, whether it's going to be a wired network, a wireless network, and so on and so forth. Okay, the examiner really just wants you to demonstrate that you understand this topic that is being asked of you. Okay, and the shallow explanations or shallow comprehension will get you the minimum marks available for you, and but when you show typical understanding, you really understand this topic, you understand this concept, you find that even as you put down your points, I almost say that you even run out of space for where to write. You answer in spaces, but sometimes some people run out of answering spaces, not because they knew what they were supposed to write, but sometimes they did know what they were supposed to write. They were just repeating the same stuff over and over and over. One point, and they expand 1 point to fit one A4 paper. All right, so basically what you're supposed to do is that you note the number of marks that are indicated on this question. Suppose this question is carrying four marks, then you're supposed to give 4 valid, distinct points. Okay, so come up with 4 things that you can talk about that you understand on this topic. Okay, and then you're going to get more marks. In my opinion, it is very good, or it is important really, if a question, for example, is carrying 4 marks and you have 5 points. In my opinion, it's important to just write 5 points. You lose nothing by listing maybe 5 points when a question wanted 4 points. You lose nothing. Okay, sometimes a point that you may list may not be considered as a point, so to say, and you may get that extra point or extra mark from the extra point that you put there. So it's really especially questions that have to do with essays, because examiners will read through your essay, like the last question, the discussion question. Examiners will read through that question, and they'll be looking out for points that relate to the mark scheme. Okay, so something that will make up sense. So sometimes what you think would have been a point, maybe to the examiner was not even a point, and he skipped that and came across the other idea that you talked about. Okay, so it's important that you give extra information. So sometimes they can ask you questions like explain how the prolonged use of a computer can affect one's health. Okay, so you need to understand what are some of the effects of prolonged using of computers, okay, on your health. Okay, so this is what an explanation question would entail. Okay, let's look at another type of question. Describe. Okay, so when you've come across the command word describe in an exam, it entails that you need to give a detailed account of something. Okay, and similar to explain, except this is more in detail. So you look at things like the appearance, for example, the functionality or how it works. You look at the advantages, you look at the disadvantages, etc., etc. Okay, so you really need to be very careful when you answer such questions. So things like who, what, how, where, etc. can really be of help if you try to talk about such a question, okay, or to give an answer to such a question. So for example, they would say describe how expert system work in diagnosing a car fault. Some of you guys, you have cars, let's say German cars like Audi, or I don't know if Audi is German. Yeah, Audi could be German car. Okay, cars like Mercedes-Benz or BMW, where you can connect your car to the computer, and an expert system would then diagnose the car and really detect where some fault is coming from the car. Now, you need to know how expert systems work for you to describe them. Okay, so you have a general, not a general, let me say a typical understanding of how expert system works, things like the knowledge base, the inference engines and stuff like that. You need to know how they work and how they are interconnected, how they depend on one another and all. And so as you begin to answer such questions, you begin to talk about what, who, how, where. Okay, just how data moves from one place to the other, and how it is processed, and how results are actually communicated to the user, and things like that. Okay, so describe questions are very important questions in IGCSE ICT. They really reveal an in-depth understanding of the theoretical topics that you'd have covered in class, and they really qualify you as an A-star student or as an F student. God forbid that you be an F student. Okay, I don't want you to be an F student at all. Okay, it's not good to be an F student. Right, so to answer a question that deals with describe and obtain maximum marks available, your answers must be logically correct. Okay, that is, you must join ideas from one to the other. For example, the example above we put up there for expert system, you can just start from the result and then go to how data is collected from the result, and then you go to how it is processed and stuff like that. No, your answers must be able to flow from one idea to the other. That way it will be easy for the examiner to follow. Okay, there will be questions. For example, they would say describe how sensors connect let me say how sensors are used in a burglar system. You guys, you don't just start with, well, the alarm will sound. Okay, so the alarm will trigger or something like that. No, you first of all follow the logical idea. What triggers the alarm? I mean, before the alarm triggers, what happens? Okay, so you talk about maybe the intruder coming in, then there is this, a signal that is picked up by the sensor, then the signal is sent via an ADC converter, then from the ADC converter the signal is sent to the microprocessor, then from the microprocessor compares the stored value with the value that is coming from the sensor, and if there is a match, then it sends a signal to an actuator via a digital to analog converter and things like that. So you kind of follow the logical idea so that you get the maximum number of marks that are available for this question. I hope, guys, you really understand what I'm saying here, and if you do not understand, I encourage you to pause this video for a moment, if possible, rewind it, and go ahead and listen to what I'm saying. This is very important, guys, so that you really maximize on this question. And usually these questions that ask you to describe or to do this, they carry some they carry 4 marks, some they carry 5 marks, some they carry 6 marks, and you cannot afford to lose even 3 marks on each of these questions in an exam, because overall you find that you would have lost about 30 marks, and that will be very costly on your part if you are aiming to get an A-star overall. Okay, so let's look at questions that have to do with command words that have to do with design. And you guys, this really is aimed at you guys showing us that you are very creative. Okay, so design questions usually they border between the practical aspect and you more like putting your practical work into theoretical work. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah, so you can design things like an input capture screen, okay, where you're supposed to type in, for example, you capture, let's say it's a patient, let's say health or medical or library system, and somebody goes to the library, they want to borrow some books, and then you have this capture screen form, and they're supposed to fill in your name. Similarly, guys, what you do when you're creating an account, for example, if you guys have created an account before with, let's say, with Hotmail or with Gmail or with Facebook, and you've got kind of a filled in an online form, and that is how an input capture screen form would look. Okay, so it's not really something that's strange. Okay, so you can design also an output form, okay, things like where what will be displayed on the screen after some process of some kind has taken place. Okay, so these questions are also very important. You find them in your theory papers. So at advanced stages, sometimes you can be asked to design a network. Okay, computer science guys, for them it's just about designing stuff and creating this and creating that. But you guys in ICT, once in a while you'll be asked a question that has to do with design, but very rarely are you asked questions to do with design. But you should be prepared, especially with the fact that some of these concepts can come from an aspect of a practical question or practical topics. Okay, remember this, the focus of this syllabus or this paper is that it focuses from section 1 to section 21, and that includes the practical aspects, and design can fall or can be a part of the practical aspect. Okay, you guys, you design your web pages in paper 3, and so in a paper 1 you can be asked to design a simple web page for maybe a trip capture, whatever. Okay, so I won't spend so much time talking about that, but to answer such questions you need to be confident with the practical work. Okay, so usually they will ask you to design something that would have been doing in the practical work. It could be a web page maybe. It's in most cases of the things that I've seen, it has been to do with web pages. Okay, so the last command word that I would look at is discuss, and this is usually you find this as the last question in your theory paper. There may be one or two questions within the paper that may ask you to discuss one or two things, but for your last question in the exam, this is your most this is the question with possibly the most number of marks for a single question in the exam. It's usually just about 6 to 8 marks available on this question. I've not seen a 12-mark award for this question, but so far I've seen about 8 marks awarded to candidates on these questions. Okay, so the things that you're supposed to consider when answering such questions: you need to address both sides of the discussion. So you look at the cons and the pros, you look at the advantages and the disadvantages, you look at the limitations, and you look at the benefits. So you kind of compare and contrast when you answer this question. Now this is very important, guys, that you need to justify the issues that you're going to raise as you discuss such topics as you answer these questions. For example, if you brought in an aspect of maybe they say discuss the importance of having relatively large size of RAM in a computer, and you cannot just say, well, having large size of RAM makes the computer fast. How? You need to justify the issues that you're going to raise. Okay, you cannot just say it is fast. It is fast in what way? Compared to what? What are you using to gauge this thing that it should be fast? You can't just say it is cheap or it is expensive. Okay, or I mean, you need to justify every issue that you're going to raise. So questions that have to do with discussion, you need to justify. For example, you can say it is fast because there'll be enough space for data to be held, so enough data will be obtained at a go and stuff like that. You can say it is cheap compared to maybe this other method, or it is fast compared to this other method. So you're kind of justifying every argument that you put up. So in your discussion, it is an argument. Okay, this is why you find that, like in class, you guys, if you do have discussions, sometimes someone can agree with you, sometimes someone can disagree with you, and this is why you need to justify every issue that you're going to raise in a discussion question. Okay. Also, you need to give a reasonable conclusion. Most candidates, they lose marks here and get, for example, out of 8 they get 6 marks, and these are excellent candidates, these are very good candidates, but because they lacked a reasonable conclusion, they didn't conclude. So sometimes you can be asked, say, discuss why, for example, you think the use of ATMs is a bad idea in this emerging technology. Okay, so such a topic on the line, you need to justify. Okay, you present your arguments, you discuss, and then you must give a reasonable conclusion. Therefore, I feel using ATMs is a bad idea for these reasons, or for the reasons stated above, or I'm in support of the idea that this. So you kind of give a reasonable conclusion about the topic that is at hand. That way you find that you maximize the number of marks that you're going to get. And lastly, you're going to give answers that are relevant. Okay, you should give answers that are very clear, and they should be organized. Remember, I talked about your answers being logical. Okay, so they should flow from one idea into the other. Okay, so you should have your answers presented in a structured and coherent format. Okay, that is logical and consistent. Okay, so guys, I cannot overemphasize on this one. If you're going to get more marks on this question, remember to address both sides of the discussion. Okay, look at the benefits, look at the limitation. If it's a topic or two topics that have been mentioned, talk about the two topics. Okay, so discuss the first topic, discuss the second topic, justify the issues that you have raised, and always give a reasonable conclusion. In other words, side with one aspect, okay, and give it as your conclusion. It doesn't matter whether you give the conclusion on this other side. Really, your conclusion is your opinion, and no one should impose it on you. It's your opinion. And so usually examiners are just interested in the fact that you have given a reasonable conclusion on the topic that is at hand. Okay, and lastly, give answers that are relevant, clear, organized, and presented in a structured and coherent format. Okay, all right. Right, so let's look at the assessment distribution for an IGCSE theory paper. And so the paper usually is broken down into this one: assessment objective 1, assessment objective 2, assessment objective 3, and you have theory paper, and you have 70%, 15%, and 15%. So what do these figures mean? So the first 70% actually entail that you'll be asked questions that challenge you to recall, select, and communicate knowledge and understanding of ICT. This is where questions that have to do with describe, explain, contrast, compare, name, list, give, mention, all these command words, they'll fall, or they'll make about 70% of the overall exam. Okay, so what you need as you prepare for this paper is that you understand these topics from your heart, not from your mind. Because your mind sometimes can be disturbed by other things that are happening, maybe issues at home or issues in your personal life. All right, so make sure that now I just want you to know that you need to make sure that you master the concepts and the topics that are involved in this paper. Most of the questions that you're going to do in this paper, about 70% of the questions, will actually test you. Can you recall what you learned in class or what you studied? Can you remember? Do you understand this? Can you explain this? Okay, and that will be about 70%. And then 15% of these questions will be how you apply the knowledge, okay, and the understanding and skills that you you obtained to produce ICT based solutions. Usually if you guys have seen Excel questions in an IGCSE ICT paper, theory paper, and maybe they asked you how to use maybe the VLOOKUP, okay, you are demonstrating how you apply your knowledge of using VLOOKUP in Excel, but this time you're just using it in a theory paper. So you can be asked to use things like sum, things like writing down a formula to do the total or to do the count and stuff like that. So this is where you don't throw away your practical knowledge. I know some of you you're very excited that you wrote your practical papers and you threw away some of the skill that you acquired because you're just memorizing stuff for the sake of going to write some of these papers. But you know, you'll be tested with some of these concepts, okay? So don't throw away some of the skills that you need. And the other ones will really involve you to use skills that are at a very high cognitive order, so to say. Things like analyze, evaluate, and make reasoned judgments and present conclusions. So questions like the ones that we looked at, like the discussion. So these are questions that will make about 15% of the exam, okay? So this is why it is the last question in the exam, and you find that it may be just one or two questions within the exam that will be there, but it will be just about 15% of the overall exam. You'll be asked to analyze something, to evaluate something, okay? So you criticize it, you look at the benefits, you look at the drawbacks, and you make a reasonable judgment, that is, you make a conclusion, you present your ideas logically, and so on and so forth. And this part will just constitute about 15%. So you guys, as you prepare your exam, in my opinion, it's very easy actually to get the last, the 15%. It's very easy to get them because they're coming from your practical part. And if you guys have really mastered your practical work, it's very easy to demonstrate your skill. Especially questions that have to do with assessment objective 2, because that's where you're just applying your skill from the practical. That's the one that has to do with assessment objective 3, maybe a little bit tricky here and there, but if you understand your theory well, you just need to know what is expected for you in order to answer these questions. Okay, so this is very useful, guys, and let's get to the section now where I talk about the examiner report before I wind up this video. So, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, that the examiner report is a very important document that you cannot run away from. A number of schools don't take advantage of this document. They don't even know where to find it. Some of them have seen it, but they don't even use it. Teachers don't use it. Students don't use it. And this document is just sitting there on networks or on the internet, and forgetting that it is actually one of the most important documents, maybe even better than a mark scheme in my opinion, because once you get a hold of the examiner report, I wish I could show you one sample examiner report if I will have time. I'll see if I'll have time. I can log into my CIE teacher support website, and I'll be able to extract one examiner report, and then we can see how we can get the examiner report. Yeah, but basically this report is made about the exam, and it comes from the examiners themselves. Okay, so they sit down after the exam, after they have marked the exam, and they go through all the answers, and they look at the general pattern of how candidates were answering questions, and then they give an informed report of what happened in the exam. Okay, so for example, the report gives a summary of how candidates performed in the exam, as well as discuss each question in the exam paper. Okay, they discuss it, looking at what was expected and some of the common mistakes that candidates were making in answering some of those questions. Okay, so this is a very important document. That's why it helps you to avoid giving general answers, and they guide you on really to give answers that examiners are really looking for in an exam. Okay, so I was almost coming to my final. I'm surprised I didn't put up anything. I thought I had a lot to say about the examiner report. Alright, okay, so let me just make my conclusions about this report. Okay, so basically this report will help you to give typical answers that is expected in an exam. Let me just pause for a moment here and let's see if I can go to my CIE website and let's see. Okay, I think let me just refresh this page. Okay, in the meantime, I can just close my YouTube and close this login and close this. Okay. Now let's see. Let's go to 2016 papers. From the 2016 papers, then we can get examiner report. Let's look at the March, or let's look at the recent one, the November 2016 examiner report. Okay, so let me try to download this one and see if we can okay, so basically the report is made about, okay, so this is the examiner report, and the key message, okay, this is really the message that examiners really write and advise regarding the exam to candidates. Okay, so it says candidates should be advised, let me just zoom in a little bit. Okay, it says candidates should be advised to take care with any data entry tasks and to check and proofread their work. So this is what examiners really suggesting to you. It says candidates should be familiar with the differences between serif and sans serif fonts, with the fact that these are font properties rather than font styles. Okay, so also candidates should ensure that any screenshots within their evidence document are readable and of a suitable size. Okay, so this is what examiners were able to write. So they said here, for example, most candidates attempted the knowledge questions, but the evaluation questions was not completed well. Okay, so this is just the general knowledge that examiners were able to give about this exam. So most candidates described the checklist rather than evaluate the suitability of the checklist they had produced, and very few related this to the target audience. Okay, and there was a significant number of typographical errors in data entry throughout the paper. Many of these inaccuracies could have been avoided with more careful checking and proofreading, and candidates are advised to enter the text exactly as shown on the exam paper and to check and recheck this data entry in the document, report, mail match, and presentation. Usually you guys, I've been saying this in the practical papers that we've been doing, paper 2 and paper 3, that when you see examiners in the exam paper, the text that you're being asked to enter is in bold, then it means you enter it as it is. If there is a capital letter, enter the capital letter as it is. If there's small letter, enter the small letter as it is. Okay, don't try to change anything. Okay, so it's very important that you do that. So for example, here they say that common errors included incorrect capitalization, incorrect or missing characters, omission of spaces, truncated headings, and additional punctuations and stuff like that. Okay, so candidates also have difficult distinction between the typeface categories serif and sans serif, with some using these as a font face name. Okay, so this was evident in the screenshot evidence of paragraph styles, where some candidates entered serif or sans serif as the font name in the font dialog box rather than selecting a font style with the serif or sans serif properties required. So you guys, you can go ahead and read some of this stuff, but let me quickly jump to this section. It says comments on specific questions. So you see that examiners are going to be making some of these comments on specific questions. For example, task 1, the evidence document. So this is in a paper, a practical paper. So they say this, let me go to the theory paper, maybe not a practical paper. Let's look at the theory paper. So let's scroll down. It's a long document because it covers all the papers and all the variants that are there. So this is paper 3. Scroll down. Let me just get to, this is paper 1-1. Okay, so let's look at paper 1-1. So question 1. Okay, so this question on internal hardware devices was a development of this type of question asked in previous series, and candidates in the main seemed to answer it well. And on a question, this part was quite well answered, though a number of candidates gave hard drive, ROM, or even CD / DVD as their responses. Okay, so you see, examiners are kind of giving you ideas, okay, of what was supposed to be given. Okay, for example, this part was not as well answered as part A. A lot of CPU processor answers, some referred to printing as a printed circuit board, was in the question. Okay, so you can go ahead and read some of the comments that the examiners make about this paper. For example, it says this question on user interfaces was well answered on the whole, and then the part A of this question was a better answered question, although a small minority put command line interface or desktop or even HTML. Some candidates answered with Windows or Notepad, which are trade names and therefore incorrect. For example, they asked you to give sample examples of command line interface or GUI, and then you gave something like Windows. Windows is a trademark. It's a Microsoft trademark. Okay, so you cannot give that as part of your command line. Okay, or rather, your part of your graphical user interface. Okay. So this was this is your examiner report. You can find this document. You can ask your teachers about this document, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to give you this document. And also, if you're a teacher and you've not been using this document, I suggest that you take serious this document. Go through it as you revise with your students. Check some of the typical mistakes that they make. And then they guide them on what is expected of them. Okay, let them give typical answers and not just general answers and all, and then make this document available to them. If you're using a local network in your school, make this document available to them, and then give them the mark schemes, and then in their revision they'll be able to get and use this document very well. Okay, so my final words now for this one. Let's come back here as we wind up with this video tutorial, not tutorial, just video tips for your paper 1. Okay, so you guys take note of the things that I've been able to say regarding this paper. I did a thorough research on this paper, looking at the syllabus, looking at the training notes for all the sessions that I've attended for teacher staff, or let me say staff extension development, whatever. Yeah, so I looked up all my notes that I've gathered so far from the trainings that I've had with Cambridge regarding ICT, and the things that have been pinpoint, and I've been able to gather some of these things and put them up in this video. And so these are the things that I've been able to communicate to you. And for the teacher friends who are watching these videos, or my friends who are teachers and they are watching these videos, you know, some of the things that I've been able to say, you bear witness that if you've attended some of the trainings, some of these things have actually been talked about. They may not be in all because of time, but we really can take advantage of some of the concepts that I've mentioned here. So you guys, as you go into the paper on is it on Wednesday or Thursday on the 17th, I wish you very well. Okay, don't be intimidated by anything. You've been preparing for these papers right from year 10, and some of you have come a long way, and you've done your paper 2 and you've done your paper 3, and you are waiting for your paper 1 to confirm your A star or your A. And let me say, this paper is going to be a very fair paper, so to say. Most of the questions that you're going to find in this paper are not outside what you've covered in classes. Of course, I understand some of you, you've been able to, you've been sending me messages that you've not been able to cover some topics in your theory paper, and you are worried about how you're going to answer questions in this paper. But may I say that if you do have your syllabus and you do have your textbook, you can easily go through some of these questions and topics. And the best way to revise for an IGCSE ICT theory paper is to really answer as many questions as possible. Avoid just reading the notes. Of course, you can refer to the notes when you come across a question and you can't find an answer to that, or you really want to understand the topic that deals with that topic, with that question. then you can refer to your notes. But between now and Wednesday, or between now and the 17th, you would do well to revise through as many past papers as you can find. Okay, and the good part with theory paper is that you can simply refer to a mark scheme and you'll be able to understand some of the concepts. So have at hand your mark scheme, your question paper, and your textbook. And don't just rush to the mark scheme. Sometimes it's a good idea to look at the textbook and understand the topic, so that you really get that 70% that you get from assessment objective 1 as part of the assessment distribution. Okay, so thank you so much for watching this video. I know it's been a lengthy video, so to say, and I trust I've communicated something to you. And if there be any issues that you're struggling with and stuff, you can comment them out below this video. But I cannot promise you that I'm going to answer all of them for now, because between now and Tuesday, I'm really gonna be busy preparing for my lesson observation. So I may not even have time. I just sneaked out just to make this video for you guys, so that I could focus on other things as well. Okay, so thank you so much for watching, and I wish you the very, very best in your paper. It's been a wonderful journey. Thank you so much for supporting my channel. And as you progress, some of you are going to do A-level IT, and some of you are going to go into computer science. I'll meet you still, because I'll be putting up some A-level videos this year, and we'll be together next year. All right, so ciao.